It has been over 325 days since the reignition of conflict between Hamas and Israel and Gaza, which has created one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history. Many international intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations and the International Court of Justice have found that the actions Israel is committing against the Palestinians across the Gaza Strip and West Bank are considered genocidal actions. In the elections back here in the U.S., the Gaza situation is quickly becoming a focal point for many voters. At the Democratic National Convention, Gaza took center stage. Activist organizations across Chicago joined coalitions to march and protest on the DNC, and nearly every day in Chicago welcomed some kind of protest, whether permitted or unpermitted. Prior to the convention's start, organizations like the U.S. Palestinian Community Network, Bodies Outside of Unjust Laws, and the Answer Coalition said how important this genocide in Gaza is to their organization's policy platform. Hatem Aboudeya, the national chair of the U.S. Palestinian Community Network, stressed that the coalition was protesting for important reasons, but didn't think any actual things would occur.
So I think it's important to start by saying that we don't have any expectations of the top leaders of either administration to adopt any policy positions that we want them to adopt.
He also said that the Democratic Party keeps pushing for a lesser of two evils situation which isn't warranted.
And what has been frustrating to our communities for all these years is that the Democrats continue to ask us to vote for the lesser of two evils. But there really isn't a lesser of two evils when it comes to Palestine.
Aboudeya expressed the coalition to march on the DNC is not protesting the Democrats to show support for another candidate.
Her fear-mongering and her response to protesters at one of her speeches was, oh, well, if you keep protesting, then Trump's going to win. It's not that we're protesting the Democrats because we're supporting Trump. That's ridiculous. We know he's a pig. We know he's evil. We've seen what happened in his first term. And nobody in our coalition supports him.
Another community organizer, Andy Thayer with Bodies Outside of Unjust Laws, shared that the Democrats need to stop funding the genocide if they want to stop the suffering.
In terms of Gaza, it should be a no-brainer to people who believe in reproductive justice, who believe in queer freedom, that you don't free people by bombing the hell out of them.
Erin Boyle, with the Students for Democratic Society at University of Illinois Chicago, said that she needs the next presidential administration to change its course.
I go to a university that has the largest Palestinian student diaspora in the country. Like, it's so wrong. It's so morally wrong. So I need an administration that's not funding genocide.
She also said it's not just the Democratic Party at fault.
Just because, the Democrats are the ones that are in power, the Republicans are equally complicit in it.
Finally, Nino Brown, an organizer with the Act Now to Stop War and End Racism, or the Answer Coalition, said how pertinent Gaza is in this election.
And we hope that this becomes this is an apex or turning point for the movement, where the Democrats realize that they will lose this election if they do not meet the demands of the people.
Members of the Student Voices for Palestine, or SVP, at Hofstra University shared their thoughts on Gaza's role in this election as well. Caitlin Gladkowski, a sophomore sustainability major, shared their frustration with the two-party system here.
This blatant genocide and the disgusting reaction of Republicans and Democrats to it has already eroded the thin trust most young Americans had in the two-party system.
President of the SVP at Hofstra, Giovanni Salsa, shared how he doesn't trust that the Democratic Party actually wants to stop this genocide.
I mean, if that is truly what she wants, to formulate a ceasefire between, with Israel, I think, or diverse two-state solution between Israel and Palestine, I think the first step is to actually go through with the ceasefire and make those motions.
And he also shared how his perspective as a Palestinian American plays a role in his stance on the Democrats.
So as a Palestinian, it's really hard for me to go up there, and when Biden was still, in the running, I just refuse. I'm not going to vote for someone who's enabled this. Same with Kamala. Same goes to Kamala. I'm not going to show up and give someone my vote who's actively enabling this.
Mikey Katzen, the events manager for SVP, said voters need to push for actual change.
Voters need to be constantly agitating. We're all sipping the coconut milk. We're all sipping the coconut water. But you have to make your demands known, and you have to be, it's corny, be the change that you want to be.
Some of the major planned protests, like the March on the DNC, welcomed in huge amounts of people and stayed peaceful. At the March on the DNC, over 20,000 people came to protest. Other protests were unplanned but remained peaceful, including various Gaza protests right outside the gates of the United Center where the DNC was held. Jody Evans from Code Pink said that the political protesting they were doing was more so for the delegates than for Democratic leaders.
We're doing some theater in front of the delegates to remind them we try to be disarming, to create a little bit of humor, because it's very hard to think about yourself as the people that are funding genocide.
Another protester, Travis Hindell, said that his reason for protesting was to show both the Democratic leaders and delegates the kind of impact that Gaza will play in this election.
I am coming up here to make sure that we address all these concerns that we've had about how the Democratic Party has been complicit in funding what is an actual genocide, right? I don't use that term willy-nilly, okay? When I say the G word, I mean it, okay?
There were protests in Chicago that led to some violence, including a protest that got out of hand outside the Israeli consulate in Chicago, leading to multiple arrests, including the accidental arrest of 3 journalists. In the span of the 4-day DNC, Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling said that 74 arrests were made, the majority from that protest at the Israeli consulate.
The blood of Israel is on your hands!
But it wasn't just the protest outside the United Center that became a focal point of this convention, but protests came in different ways inside the center. To start on the first night of the DNC, a group of activists unfurled a banner inside the arena with the message, "Stop arming Israel." This quickly developed into tension, with people blocking this banner with signs that read, "We heart Joe Biden," and hitting some activists on the head with those signs. Another controversy out of this convention surrounded the Democratic National Convention Committee's response to the uncommitted delegates. For context, large populations of the United States voted uncommitted in their primaries, showing the red line that many have with the Democratic Party in this genocide. Originally, this was targeted against Joe Biden when he was the candidate for his lack of action surrounding Israel's in the Gaza Strip. But once Biden stepped down, the uncommitted movement sent their efforts to Harris's campaign. While the DNC did host a council meeting with uncommitted delegates about where to go next, 30 of these delegates staged a sit-in at the convention center, calling on the Harris campaign to welcome a Palestinian-American speaker to their stage. Many of the protesters, delegates, and lawmakers called on Harris to initiate an arms embargo against Israel and to stop funding the genocide of Palestinians. And on the last night of the convention, Harris responded regarding Israel in a way that many criticized.
And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself.
She also spoke on the Palestinian suffering.
What has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking.
It could easily be us. What would you do if you were alive?
Now, people have spoken out against the DNC as a whole and have further called on Harris to revise her policy positions. Hatem Aboudeya, in a press conference, said, quote, "We heard nothing new. Leading with Israel's right to defend itself in the wake of 40,000 massacred Palestinians is absolutely tone-deaf," and calling for a ceasefire without explaining that Netanyahu keeps moving the goalposts on this original July 2nd proposal that the unified Palestinian resistance agreed to is nothing but lip service. Hofstra Student Voices for Palestine member Caitlin Gladkowski again shared their opinions on the speeches and the Democratic National Convention as a whole. They shared their thoughts again on Harris's campaign, especially after this convention.
Instead of prioritizing young voters as her target audience, Harris has continuously discarded young progressive voices at any chance she gets, instead opting for vying for the attention of centrists and Republicans. By denying a Palestinian Democratic speaker and only hosting Israeli voices, the Democrats have all but shouted how little they care about the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that continue to be massacred by Israel using our weapons.
They also said how there were a couple things that the convention showed out positively for.
The uncommitted group was granted a small room at the center where they held a historic panel for Palestinian human rights, which was the only upside of the convention aside from the amazing show out at the protest there.
And they finally shared how disappointed they were in Harris's stance and speech.
This is especially clear when Harris said during her speech that, as Commander-in-Chief, she will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world. What message does it send to pro-peace activists when you claim the label of most lethal military in the world?
Multiple organizations were reached out to hear the perspectives of pro-Israeli supporters, including the Hofstra Students Supporting Israel and its executive board members, the Israeli American Council in Chicago, the Friends of the Israeli Defense Forces in Long Island, and the Sid Jacobson Jewish Community Center, which frequently partners with Supporting Israel on Long Island. With this election, it's almost certain that Gaza will be a massive issue for many people, as a poll from YouGov in May found that over 64% of people support a ceasefire. I'm Cameron Bowden for Independent Reporting.